Hello, everyone, and welcome to Step Into My Office, Commercial Property Executives podcast series that tackles all things office and flex office related. Join me and industry experts in the field as we take some trips across major markets and delve into investment strategies and opportunities in the sector. I'm Olivia Bunescu, Senior Associate Editor, and for this episode, I'm joined by Brian Chernett, Vice President of Leasing and Acquisitions at Friedman Properties, as we delve into the current trends shaping the office market and what's to come in the sector, considering its recalibration. Chernett shares the company's approach and focus on particular submarkets, how it overcomes challenges, and where does flexibility come into play across Friedman's portfolio. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation to step into my office. And to set the stage, when you look at the office market right now, what's the reality of it on the ground?
Yeah, it's a great question. So broadly speaking, we're coming out of the pandemic. We've seen, high vacancy rates. They're currently hovering around 26%, which is up significantly in recent years. We've also seen the sublease space market balloon as a result of COVID from, call it 5 years ago. And, I think we peaked at 8 or 9 million square feet, and we currently have about 5 million square feet, and that's, still several million square feet. That's above and beyond the typical norms of the market. And, as a result of that, as we're slowly stepping down in the sublease market, you're seeing space coming back to the market on a direct basis, and that is propping up that high vacancy rate of 26%. So when we talk about direct, that's what do the landlords control? When we talk about overall vacancy, that would lump in the sublease market. So if we're hovering at 26% or so with a direct vacancy rate, it's getting propped up as a sublease coming off the market and become more direct. So that's got a negative impact on the marketplace, no matter what. But all that said, leasing activity, it's been super strong in recent quarters. We've seen a lot of momentum in both the larger and smaller tenants, but it's still only at like 40% of pre-pandemic levels.
Mm-hmm.
All that said, though, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. All that said, though, it's really a tale. So that's the broad market, but the boots on the ground and what we're really seeing, it's a tale of two markets. And that's, as I said, there's significant momentum in the marketplace, and especially with buildings that offer what we call a commute-worthy experience. If a building is well located, it's close to public transportation, it's highly amenitized. The amenities could be robust with restaurants, fitness centers, tenant lounge, conference facilities, all those things. And it's very attractive. Those are doing extremely well. So for example, Class A trophy buildings that are near the train station with high-rise views are operating in a very different market than the rest of the market. So they probably have vacancy rates that are in the mid-single digits. Whereas, as we previously stated, the broader market is at 26% vacant. So it's really a tale of two different markets. As those Class A buildings or trophy buildings are filling up, we're starting to see a spillover effect into the Class B buildings that have had a reset in their basis, are highly amenitized, offering spec suites. Those are starting to really see a big push in the momentum. But the commodity buildings that have the high basis aren't highly amenitized, don't have a terrific location in terms of access to the public transportation, or just in general, they're struggling to transact. Those are going to continue to languish. And that's where we're seeing, again, that elevated vacancy rate.
And I know you're more active in Chicago, so in that market specifically, are there any other trends you're watching in terms of specifically sublease space or tenant requirements, leasing velocity, or is it similar to the broader market?
I think it's similar to the broader market. The return to office or RTO policies have been a hot topic for the last, call it 4 or 5 years. We continue to monitor those policies, and I think they are currently driving a lot of demand. I think, if you look back 2 or 3 years, you'll see that a lot of companies are trying to figure out how to get their people back into the office and what is that balance? Should they be in the office once a week or 5 days a week or somewhere in between? As those policies are taking shape, we've seen robust demand from companies who are saying, we're now figuring this out and we are comfortable taking space, whether it be renewing, expanding, or relocating. They're figuring out what they want to be in the future and how their office environment is being shaped by those RTO policies. So that's really the trend that we continue to monitor. Smaller organizations, they've been addressing their office needs at a very fast pace. In the first half of 25, we saw more demand amongst the 5 to 10,000 foot users since 2018. So that's a positive trend line, especially for a portfolio like ours at Friedman Properties, where we have generally speaking, we have smaller buildings that cater to those smaller tenants. What's interesting is CBRE, a prominent real estate services firm on a global basis, they published a survey recently that suggests that 96% of employers with less than 500 employees intend to either maintain or expand their footprint in the near future. So again, that bodes really well for portfolios like ours, but in general for the market as well.
And if you had to put the roster in categories, what types of tenants are actually expanding their footprint and which categories are still in wait and see mode?
I don't know if we can categorize specific industries or companies and say these are what is really growing and not growing. I think the entire spectrum of organizations are always evaluating their space needs, and it really becomes very company specific. That said, the of tech companies really being driven right now by the AI boom. It's been an interesting story in the marketplace, not just for real estate, but in general, the economy, the business environments overall. And it's certainly in the early innings of its impact. And I think we're all globally trying to understand what does this really mean and what's the impact on every segment of the marketplace. Also, I would say the pendulum always swings too far, right? So in terms of how companies design their space in their space, it used to be everyone gets a private office. And then probably 10 or 15 years ago, it became let's all move to an open work environment. And that really allowed companies to become more efficient, put more people into a space. And now that pendulum's starting to swing back a little bit, where it's not let's change how we're working, but let's evolve a little bit. And I think this is the interesting part coming out of the COVID experiment. And so I think we still see a lot of the open design, but there's more of a focus on how do we have more private spaces for our employees? They might have a desk in the open area, but how do we provide more spaces for them to have collaborative moments with team members? How do we have an area where they can spend more time doing heads down work in privacy? And I think that's the evolution we're starting to see right now, and very, very much a hospitality-driven environment as well. So I think we've seen this with office space and multifamily and other segments where they're drawing on what you might see from the hospitality segment of the market and say, how do we incorporate some of those things into the way that we operate our space and design it?
And considering you have experience in leasing and acquisitions, what's been the biggest structural change in how office decisions get made today compared to a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I don't know if it's changed dramatically from a leasing perspective. I think if you looked back again 10, 15, 20 years ago, I think decisions were largely driven as a function of cost. So, it was the CFO and the finance team that was really driving those decisions in terms of should we be in building A or building B. I think as time has moved on, you've seen the HR department have a much more influential and driving force behind the decision making. And that's been a big shift. And why HR? Because there's such a focus on how do we secure the best talent, right, in the marketplace. And so the HR teams are looking at each building and thinking about what I referenced earlier is the commute-worthy experience. How does an employee, from the moment they wake up in the morning, get to the train or to the bus or the car, what does that commute look like once they get in the door of their building? Is there a coffee shop? Is there a lounge that they can go sit down and do 30 minutes of heads down work? Or can they go do a quick workout before or after work? And then it's about how does that day unfold? And after work, can you meet up with your colleagues and go have a cocktail and talk about your day, have a social experience? And what does that commute look like back to your home? For those reasons, I think the HR department has had a much greater influence on leasing decisions. From an acquisition standpoint, there's commodity buildings out there that are just really ripe for repositioning. And by repositioning, I mean that could be a change of use, right? So we might have an office building, as I mentioned before, that has a really high basis and can't compete for the office space. So is it functionally obsolete? Is its highest and best use multifamily? Could it be a hotel? Things like that. So those are the type of things that we're constantly looking at from an acquisition standpoint. For example, like Friedman Properties, we own over 5 million square feet in the River North submarket of Chicago. We've looked at many acquisition opportunities in recent years, and we've fully vetted them. Our decision-making process is about, can this be used as traditional office? Is there a higher and better use if we were to convert it to something different? Could it be multifamily? Could it be a hotel? Could it be hospitality, self-storage? How does it fit into the total footprint and puzzle piece? Or how does this puzzle piece fit into our broader submarket that we control quite a bit? So we take a little bit different lens than other folks too.
You briefly mentioned where you're concentrated as a company. I'd like to move in the discussion a bit into your portfolio and your strategy.
Yeah.
And for a listener who may not be familiar with Friedman Properties, how would you describe your portfolio and footprint today?
That's a great question. So we're a little bit different from most owners of real estate. Typically, especially with institutional owners, you'll see there is a focus on, should we own a lot of office or a lot of hotel or retail. Our focus is very geographically driven. So we own and operate about 5 million square feet in the River North submarket of Chicago. And for those that don't know River North, it's a very extremely vibrant 24/7 live work play type environment, probably the original live work play environment of Chicago. And we are adjacent to what we would call the central business district, or the loop, for people who know Chicago well. So within our portfolio, we have 8 hotels. We have a couple million square feet of office space, probably a million square feet or so of restaurants and retail and galleries. We have a centralized parking garage that's, call it right in the center of our portfolio, that helps support all of those different businesses and uses, from the retail to the hotels to the office. So we are very geographically focused, asset and use diversified. So for us, our portfolio, we like to curate experiences. We view it as an ecosystem. We're kind of, I would describe it as like the Apple of real estate, right? If you come into our portfolio, it's how can you, and you're renting office space, how can you benefit from the retail that we have around you? Can we offer reservations to restaurants you can't normally get into? Can we provide discounts on the hotels that we operate? We can offer parking at the centralized parking garage at a discounted rate. Those are the things that we're always kind of looking at. And whether it be a lease or an acquisition, is really focused about how is that piece going to fit into the broader experience of our portfolio, or the broader puzzle.
So you mentioned River North neighborhood. I'm wondering, in this part of the office cycle, considering the distress in the market, being concentrated in this neighborhood, has it helped you or has it hurt you in some way?
Yeah, I think you can look at it both ways. Generally, I think that we're in a very positive space. Again, having that ecosystem is paramount to the success of our portfolio. So the tenants we cater to, generally speaking, are in that's, call it 3 to 6 or 7,000 feet. We certainly have smaller, we certainly have larger, but that's kind of our sweet spot. So we try to really lean into that. And for that, those type of tenants are looking for that experience where they say, is your building highly amenitized? Our larger assets are, our smaller ones are amenitized by the neighborhood. And so for the neighborhood, the ability to offer that ecosystem with parking, hotel, restaurants, the exclusivity that you can get, and that's been really important for us, and it really helped us with our success. Additionally, a big part of our focus is also about the historic nature of our buildings. So we have been in the submarket for over 50 years. And we have really purchased a lot of buildings that have become mixed use, but they're historical in nature. Oftentimes they're landmarked. They have unique character that can't be replicated. And I think a lot of tenants really embrace that as well because their clients, their employees are attracted to that type of stuff. There's a story behind the building. There's a story behind each space. One of our buildings had Charlie Chaplin in it. I mean, just such a rich history in the River North market and within our buildings that can't be replicated. And by the way, it doesn't mean the building remains old, right? It has character, it has a story behind it, but we really focus on also modernizing the building as well. The systems need to be improved, right? So it's about how do you bring the new and the old together to create a really special experience.
And about that, how do you balance preserving the character of the building and adding this new modern infrastructure that today's tenants expect? Exactly.
Yeah, the preservation is on the true history of the building, the exterior, how it looks, how it feels, embracing the unique characteristics that are throughout a building in the interior as well. The modernization really comes through the elevators, the systems, the amenities, and really linking up with some of the things that we've talked about is what makes a commute-worthy experience. So how do you bring that all together? So our buildings typically are mixed use in nature. We usually have ground floor retail, largely leaning towards restaurants. We have over 50 restaurants in our portfolio. And then we have really unique office space above. And some of that is it's there's just beautiful spaces. We have, brick and timber buildings, exposed bow truss, ceilings that could be soaring ceiling heights that could be 30 feet high. These are unique characteristics that you're not going to find anywhere else. And so we kind of laugh about it at times and say there's been this interest in the last probably decade of how do we build, throughout the country, probably the world, it's how do we build, buildings that look old. Well, we have the authentic thing, right? We have that
Yeah.
exposed brick and we don't need to put up faux brick. It's the real thing.
Yeah. Going back to your portfolio, you mentioned the character and the personality and the whole ecosystem of the building. I presume those are must-haves when you look at acquisitions. What are some red flags in buildings that make you
Yeah,
walk away?
yeah, I wouldn't say there's any like absolute red flags. And even from an acquisition standpoint, while we lean into the historical nature, and that's the bread and butter of our organization, not all buildings can be that. So again, our focus from an acquisition standpoint is largely geographically focused, and how can an asset or an acquisition opportunity serve as a piece in the broader puzzle. And so, we look for, of course, we care about the historical nature if that's relevant, but it not always is, right? But beyond that, we're looking at, are the floor plates efficient? What's the highest and best use of this building? If we were to embrace the use or change the use, how does that fit into the broader scheme of our portfolio? Again, looking to curate experiences. What's the location? It's the proverbial slogan for real estate is location, location, location. Does it fit in well? And is it near public transit? Does it have access to the hotels, to restaurants and things like that? That becomes really our core focus. And so we've definitely looked at many acquisition opportunities over the past few years as there has been distress in the marketplace, and some have been very attractive and we've actively pursued, and there's some where we say I'm not sure what we can do with this and how it would really benefit the experience within the neighborhood. And so
Mhm.
for us, if it doesn't fit into the puzzle, that's probably not a good fit for us.
I understand. Let's talk a bit about flex office.
Sure.
How are tenants using flexible or shorter term space within your portfolio, and what demand signals are you paying attention to there?
Yeah, great question. Um, in my mind, and others might disagree, there's two types of flex office space. There is the co-working space that is driven by a handful of very prominent co-working organizations throughout the globe, and many smaller ones beyond that. And then there is what I would call spec suites that are They're speculatively built or pre-built by landlords that are fully furnished and allow companies to come in and maybe do a shorter term deal for 12, 24, 36 months. They certainly can do longer as well, and oftentimes do. In my mind, those are the two types of flex office. So let's talk about each. When you talk about the traditional co-working environments, I really look at that as a great incubator of businesses. You have a lot of startup type companies that will go to a co-working space because they have the flexibility of starting off with one desk and growing, scaling into 15, 20 desks if they need to, right? But they get all the benefits and the amenities that you would traditionally find in a normal office space, a kitchen, conference rooms, things like that. It's all shared. So they're not shouldering that burden on their own. There's a time and place for all that. There's also larger companies who say, I have a project and I need to scale up for 100 people and I need space for 100 people for 12 months and I don't want to sign a long-term lease. So that will also go to a co-working environment. The flex office space that I would classify as more spec suites is a lot of folks are saying it could be that startup, but it's also organizations saying, I know who we are today, but I'm not sure who I'm going to be in 2 or 3 years from now. And so
Mhm.
I need to have that flexibility. To some extent, I think both type of opportunities really serve as that incubator for much larger opportunities. So for example, we recently signed a lease 2 weeks ago with an organization that was in a co-working space. Started off as one employee and quickly scaled to 5 or 10. And they just signed a long-term lease with us coming out of the co-working saying, I know who we are today, and I feel comfortable signing a longer term lease to meet the demands of my employees because I want to be in the right environment. Because I want to be in the center of all the activity in River North, where we walk outside of our building and within a pitching wedge of our location, we can hit 50 different restaurants, right? That became important to them. And so I think that's really where the core flex office space really operates.
Mm. And in your portfolio, you're levitating more towards spec suits and flexible leasing terms, right?
Yeah, so I think in order to be successful in today's marketplace, you need to have a spec suite program that really caters to the smaller tenants. And when I say smaller tenants, it could be 1,000 feet, it could be 10,000 feet, right? But it's those size companies don't always have the bandwidth, the expertise to design or desire to design and construct their own office space. And so what a lot of landlords do, not just in Chicago, but all over the globe, is they will speculatively build these suites that are, I would say, they're beautiful in nature, but they're generic in terms of their layout. They're designed for the masses, right? So they could be largely an open environment with maybe 80% open seats with 20% private offices, but they'll have huddle spaces for collaboration, a large conference room, an open cafe to foster that collaboration amongst their employees. And that's really become attractive. I probably get a half dozen phone calls a week right now from brokers asking, what do you have available in River North in the 3 to 6,000 foot range that's ready to go in the next 60 days? And so that speed to market is also a big component of the spec suites. And so
Mhm.
I think any landlord that's going to be successful has to have some element of their portfolio building.
So, looking ahead, what are your predictions for the office sector in the upcoming year? How do you expect it to perform?
Yeah, so again, going back to the very beginning of this discussion, we've seen there's a tale of two markets. And, while we might see on paper really high vacancy rates and negative absorption, there's been a lot of demand, robust demand within a certain class of building, and more tenants coming to the market saying, I'm comfortable making my long-term decisions now. I expect to see demand continue to increase. I'm hopeful we get back to pre-pandemic levels, but really, I think as we're going to keep our eye on the economy and how there's a change in the workforce habits. But if the past year is any indication of the future, I think 2026 is going to be really an awesome year for everybody.
That sounds great. Can't wait to see what happens.
Yeah, you and I
Yeah,
both.
thank you very much.
Thank you. If you make it to Chicago, I'll show off River North to you, okay?
I can't wait.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you for stepping into our office. Stay tuned for the next episode of our series and feel free to rate this one if you've enjoyed it. For more commercial news, trend stories, and podcast episodes, visit cpexecutive.com. Have a great day and happy holidays!